Hey guys, tonight we step into the torch-lit streets of a medieval city where shadows cling to crumbling walls and every echo feels like it might be following you. The cobblestones beneath your boots are slick from an earlier rain, the kind that leaves little rivulets trickling into the gutters. You tug your cloak tighter because the night is damp and the air smells of smoke from hearth fires mixed with the less glamorous scent of chamber pots emptied far too close to the road. You tell yourself this is just another walk, but your ears stay sharp for the scrape of leather soles or the clink of iron at your back. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and your local time in the comments. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city around you feels alive, though not in the way you might prefer. It's alive with suspicion. There's a candlelit tavern across the street where merchants laugh a little too loudly, trying to drown out the fear that creeps in once the sun goes down. On the next corner, a guard leans lazily on his spear, pretending not to notice two cloaked men slipping coins from passerby purses. You notice him noticing them, and you realize corruption isn't an occasional misstep here, it's a full-time occupation. As you move through the alley, you realize this is where assassins thrive, in the cracks between law and chaos. They aren't glamorous figures in sleek leather outfits like you've seen in video games. They're ragged men and women who melt into the crowd until a contract comes knocking. Historians still argue whether the average city even knew the difference between a regular cut purse and an assassin UNL. Someone particularly important wound up missing from their morning meal, but here, in this uneasy dark, you start to feel how thin the line was between myth and survival. You step past a butcher's stall, shutters already drawn tight, though a faint iron smell still clings to the wood. It makes you think of the blades hidden under cloaks, not polished steel, but rough, workmanlike knives. A mainstream historical fact slips in here. Many of these medieval killers, especially the feared Nizari Ismaili sect, sometimes just called the Assassins, operated from mountain fortresses but often crept into cities exactly like this one, disguised as common labourers. They weren't superheroes, they were part of the scenery until the moment they weren't. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk, despite yourself. Medieval folk sometimes believed assassins carried special charms or whispered magical words to stay unseen. Imagine blaming sorcery when really it was just someone being very patient, very boring, and very good at standing still until you walked by. It's like the medieval version of stealth mode, except instead of a video game perk, it was mostly itchy cloaks and the ability not to sneeze at the wrong time. The rain starts again, a drizzle tapping off wooden shingles. You pull up your hood, though it does little to stop the cold sliding down your neck. Passing under an archway, you glance up at the gargoyle faces staring back, their stone eyes wide in eternal surprise. You wonder if those same eyes have seen contracts delivered, knives drawn, and nobles toppled with less drama than the songs ever suggest. Because here's another reality check. Life as a medieval assassin probably wasn't adrenaline-fueled parkour every night. Most of the time, it was waiting, blending in, and hoping you didn't catch the plague from leaning on the wrong doorway. Somewhere behind you, a cartwheel squeaks, jolting your nerves. You glance back to see a weary farmer pushing vegetables, his donkey tied by a fraying rope. Harmless. Still, your hand brushes the hilt of a borrowed dagger hidden under your cloak. That's when the thought hits you. If this were truly your job, you'd have to live like this constantly, on guard, suspicious, forever glancing at shadows that might never mean anything. You probably wouldn't survive this for long. A group of monks shuffle past, chanting softly, candles bobbing in little wooden holders. Their voices echo down the street, bouncing between walls until it feels like a ghostly choir following you. They smell of incense and damp wool, and for a second you wish you were walking with them, safe, anonymous, someone whose biggest worry is whether the bread tomorrow will rise. But your path doesn't bend that way. Instead, you're walking deeper into the city where whispers grow sharper, like knives being sharpened against stone. The fringe of the marketplace still bustles despite the hour. A woman hawks stale honey cakes to anyone desperate enough for a midnight snack, and a few guards argue with dice in their hands, pretending they're on duty. You overhear a pair of Mongol muttering about the mountain people and whether the stories are true, that killers trained since childhood walk among them. Historians still argue whether the reputation of the assassins was built on real numbers or inflated by terrified rulers who needed an easy villain to blame. Either way, the whispers work. You find yourself checking faces more carefully, scanning every gesture for intent. You slip between stalls, avoiding eye contact. The city doesn't feel like it belongs to you anymore. It belongs to its secrets. Every barred window hides another fear, every closed door another rumor. And though you're only walking tonight, you realize that for the Brotherhood, this was life. Endless movement through places where trust was scarce and suspicion thickened like the fog rolling in from the river. The bells in a distant tower toll deep and slow. Midnight, a time when honest people sleep and others go to work. You press forward, pulling the cloak tighter as the city exhales into darkness, and you can't tell if you're a hunter or the hunted. You slip deeper into the damp streets until the hum of the city fades into a quieter quarter, where houses lean close together like gossiping neighbours. Here, the shadows feel thicker, and the air presses down with a stillness that makes you slow your steps. Tonight, you're not just wandering, you're about to be noticed. Somewhere in this hush, the Brotherhood recruits. You don't apply for this job. It finds you, usually when you've already proven you're desperate, daring, or maybe just foolish enough to risk it. A stray dog trots by, ribs showing, its eyes reflecting lantern light. You toss it a crumb from your pocket, though even the bread looks reluctant to be eaten. That little gesture, that willingness to share in a place where most hoard, could be the very detail someone hidden in the shadows uses to judge your character. Because recruitment into a secretive order isn't always about strength, it's about spotting who can obey, who can endure, and who can vanish without leaving a ripple. A door creaks open to your left. No sign above it, no cheerful candlelight spilling out, just the faintest glow. You feel the prickling certainty that you're being invited in without words. When you step across the threshold, the smell of wax and damp earth fills your nose. A staircase spirals downward, and you think, great, nothing bad has ever happened in a medieval basement. Still, your feet descend because curiosity is a stronger leash than caution. At the bottom, a group waits, men in coarse robes, faces partly hidden. One holds a simple oil lamp, its flame sputtering. The room isn't dramatic. No golden altars, no piles of treasure, just rough stone walls and a table scarred with knife marks. And yet you sense ceremony. One man begins to speak, his voice calm but steady, telling you about a life lived in shadows, a duty higher than gold, and a loyalty that will outlast kings. They ask questions next, about loyalty, about sacrifice. Do you believe in the cause? Can you follow orders without hesitation? You answer with the only safe words, yes, yes, of course. Yet you wonder what exactly the cause is. They don't tell you whom you'll serve, only that you'll serve faithfully. You think of your life before, of scraping through markets and dodging debts, and you realize this path offers something you've never had, belonging, even if it comes wrapped in menace. Another man leans forward, his eyes sharp. "Would you lay down your life?" he asks softly, as though the air itself shouldn't hear. Your heart thuds because this is the question every initiate faces sooner or later. You nod. What else can you do? The silence afterward feels like approval. A hand rests briefly on your shoulder, heavy, final. That's it. You're no longer just a wanderer of damp alleys. You're claimed by an order that thrives on fear, rumour, and silence. Historians still argue whether initiates swore formal oaths or whether simple acts of obedience were enough, but you know one thing: once you step into this circle, there's no easy way out. As you leave the chamber later that night, the rain has stopped. The city seems changed, though really it's you who's altered. Every shuttered window looks like it hides a potential target. Every passerby might be a watcher. You walk slower, more deliberate, your breath syncing with the rhythm of hidden rules you barely understand. Somewhere far away in mountain fortresses you've only heard of, the masters already count you among their tools. You think back to that stray dog, gnawing the crumb you gave it. A small kindness in a world where your new path demands obedience above all. That irony settles in your stomach heavier than the sour wine. You realize, maybe too late, that recruitment wasn't a dramatic choice, but a quiet slip into a current stronger than you. And now you're drifting toward a life where shadows own you, and daylight is a luxury you might never trust again. The rain-soaked alleys fade behind you as the road winds upward, dragging you away from the city's chatter and toward mountains that scrape the clouds. Days pass in a blur of trudging through mud, chewing whatever stale bread you carried and trying not to think too much about whether the sour wine from your initiation was still sloshing in your stomach. Eventually the land grows harsher, the donkey caravans disappear. The forests thin into jagged stone, and the path narrows until only goats seem foolish enough to walk it. You keep climbing, lungs burning, until one morning you look up and see it, the fortress. It doesn't glow with gilded towers or majestic banners. Instead, Alamut, or something very much like it, sits perched on its cliff like a hawk unwilling to share its perch. Thick stone walls rise directly out of the rock, as though the mountain itself grew armor. You shiver, though not just from the cold. You know this place has seen countless initiates arrive, but few walk away again. Inside, the reality of training slams into you faster than the icy mountain wind. Your first bed is nothing more than a straw mat in a stone cell that smells faintly of wet goat. Someone once told you, Spartan living builds character. You're starting to think it mostly just builds back pain. Still, the mornings come early before dawn, and the drills begin. You start with running the steep slopes, your lungs heaving like blacksmith bellows. Then come climbing exercises on sheer cliffs, where every misplaced step could send you plunging into a gorge. Forget elegant parkour across rooftops. This is clinging to rocks while your fingers blister and the instructor below shouts something that sounds suspiciously like, "Don't die." Your arms ache, your knees wobble, but you keep going because failure isn't an option here. Here's the historical anchor. Hassani Sabah, the founder of the his sect, captured Alamut Fortress in 1090 and turned it into a headquarters. From this eagle's nest, the Brotherhood trained its fidai, dedicated men who carried out missions at enormous personal risk. It wasn't a glamorous Hogwarts of blades, it was a strict, often punishing environment where loyalty mattered more than comfort. Meals barely count as sustenance. Bowls of lentils, flatbread so tough you could probably use it as a weapon, and occasionally a sliver of goat's cheese if the mountain herds were generous. You chew, you swallow, and you try not to think about the roasted chickens you saw nobles devouring in the city below. A quirky tidbit sneaks in here. Some sources suggest initiates chewed pine resin as a primitive antiseptic after training injuries. You try it once and nearly crack a molar, definitely not the chewy candy of your dreams. Discipline comes in unexpected forms. One day, you're ordered to stand motionless in the courtyard for hours while snow drifts lazily down, numbing your toes. Another day, you're blindfolded and told to navigate staircases by touch. The instructors insist it's about sharpening awareness. but you suspect they also just enjoy watching you stumble into walls. The sarcastic part of you thinks, great, my assassin career starts as medieval bumper cars. Still, patterns emerge. Your senses grow sharper. You hear the crunch of footsteps on gravel long before anyone appears. You can smell the difference between the oil used on a sword and the tallow in a lamp. Even the silence feels louder now, full of clues you used to miss. Historians still argue whether recruits here trained primarily in weapon skills or in mental discipline. Some claim hours were spent memorizing religious texts and political doctrine, more brainwashing than blade practice. Others argue the focus was entirely martial: daggers, short swords, climbing ropes, disguises. You experience both. By day, you spar with wooden weapons until your knuckles split. By night, you sit cross-legged, reciting verses in a language that tangles your tongue until your voice cracks with exhaustion. Humor sneaks in where it can. You and another recruit whisper jokes during lessons about whether the fortress cook is secretly trying to assassinate everyone with burnt stew, or whether the straw mattresses are part of the training program designed to break your spirit one poke at a time. The laughter is quiet, stolen, and dangerous, but it keeps you from losing yourself entirely. You remember the stray dog from the city and wonder if it would have fared better here than you. At least the scraps might be tastier than pine resin. Still, every morning when the horn sounds and you stagger into the courtyard, you realize you've survived another day, and survival here feels like victory. One evening, the instructor demonstrates rope climbing. He scales a tower with the ease of a spider, then looks down as if to say, "Now you." You grip the rope, sweat slicking your palms, and haul yourself upward. Halfway, your arms scream for mercy, but you don't let go. At the top, the view nearly steals your breath. Valleys rolling out below, rivers like silver threads, villages no bigger than pinpricks. For a heartbeat, you feel the strange thrill of belonging to something larger than yourself, even if that something is terrifying. Then, predictably, you slip on the way down and land in a hay pile, coughing straw. The instructor shakes his head. "You live," he mutters, "for now." You can't tell if that's encouragement or a promise. Nights in the fortress are the hardest. The stone walls radiate cold, the wind howls through narrow slits, and you lie awake, your body sore from drills. But it's in these moments you notice change creeping in. Your breathing steadies, your mind sharpens, and you start to understand what it means to let the fortress reshape you. You're no longer the wanderer of city alleys. You're something being forged in stone and snow. The training may not be noble, and the beds may still smell like goats, but each day you inch closer to the shadow you're meant to become. The fortress walls don't let you rest long. Before your blisters can even scab over, the instructors call you to the armory, which, spoiler alert, is nowhere near as glamorous as you might expect. Forget shiny racks of polished steel gleaming like in a movie trailer. Here, the weapons hang in crooked rows, pitted from rust, their edges nicked from years of training. You stare at the selection, realizing these are the tools you're meant to carry into alleys and courts, and you suddenly wish you had just stuck with being a baker's apprentice. At least burnt bread rarely stabbed anyone. The first weapon you're handed is a dagger, not a jewel-studded beauty, but a stubby, utilitarian blade with a handle wrapped in cracked leather. The instructor places it in your palm with the solemnity of a priest delivering a relic. The blade feels both heavy and pitifully short, good for slipping between ribs in close quarters, less good for fighting knights in full plate. You give it an experimental swing, nearly clipping your own cloak. A smirk spreads across the instructor's face. "Don't worry," he says, "you'll only kill yourself with it once." Historical note here, medieval assassins often relied on daggers because they were easy to conceal, easy to maneuver in crowded spaces, and, most importantly, cheap. They weren't knights marching into battle with lances. They were closer to craftsmen, working with whatever tools they could carry discreetly. Next, you're shown a short sword. The blade looks serviceable, though not impressive. Its balance is off, making it clumsy compared to the elegance of the long swords you've seen knights display. But your instructor insists it's practical, light enough to carry under robes, strong enough to cut through cloth and flesh. The truth is, it's awkward, and your arm aches after just a few drills. You mutter to yourself that whoever designed this kills early didn't factor in ergonomics. Medieval OSHA was not a thing. Then come the poisons. Vials in small leather pouches are laid out on a table like a twisted herbalist's stall. Powders, extracts, liquids the colour of swamp water. One drop in wine and you have a noble collapsing mid-feast. One smear on a blade and even a scratch becomes fatal. But here's the problem. The ingredients are unstable, tricky, and often just as dangerous to the handler. One recruit brushes powder off the table with his bare hand and spends the evening vomiting in the courtyard. The instructor shakes his head and mutters something about natural selection. A quirky tidbit here. Some medieval manuals suggested unusual poisons like concoctions made from crushed emeralds or even powdered toads. Did they work? Probably not, unless you consider victim refused to eat suspiciously green stew a success. But the myths added to the aura of mystery, and in a world where fear itself was a weapon, that mattered. Beyond daggers and poisons, you're introduced to tools you didn't expect. A coil of rope with iron hooks, perfect for scaling walls, but also perfect for tangling around your own ankles if you're not careful. A set of disguises, coarse wool robes, patched cloaks, even a collection of wigs made from hair that smells like it was pulled straight from a goat. You wrinkle your nose, trying not to sneeze. The instructor says with a straight face, "Better to stink like a shepherd than bleed like a fool." Historians still argue whether assassins truly carried such diverse arsenals, or if later storytellers inflated the list for dramatic flair. Some claim they relied almost exclusively on daggers. Others insist poisons were their signature move. Either way, handling the gear makes you realize how unromantic the job really is. These aren't glamorous toys. They're risky, unreliable, and as likely to harm you as anyone else. You spend hours practicing, throwing daggers at wooden posts until your arm feels like it will detach, grinding herbs into paste while your eyes water from fumes, practicing quick draws of the short sword until you slice your sleeve more often than the practice dummy. The instructors watch silently, occasionally stepping in to adjust your grip or smack the back of your head when your focus wavers. And then there's the weight. Carrying all of this tucked under a robe is no small feat. You shuffle around the courtyard with a dagger at your waist, a rope coiled under your arm, and a pouch of powders swinging from your belt. You clank with every step like a medieval tool shed. One of the older recruits chuckles and whispers, "First mission, you'll wish you brought only half." As the day winds down, you sit in the armory, sharpening your dagger against a whetstone. Sparks leap, and for a moment you feel that mix of dread and pride. This tool, humble though it looks, is now part of you. You glance around at the racks of other blades and imagine the dozens of hands that have held them before, each one preparing to step into shadows you now inhabit. You think back to the city streets, to that farmer with his donkey, to the dice-playing guards. They'd never guess that the cloaked figure among them carries powders that could end a feast or a blade that could silence a whisper. They'd see just another shadow in the crowd, and maybe that's the scariest thing. The weapons don't make the assassin. The ability to vanish into the ordinary does. Still, you tuck the dagger away and mutter under your breath, "At least bakers don't poison themselves." A few nearby recruits snicker. Humor, even dark humor, is the only shield against how absurdly fragile your new toolkit feels. and tomorrow you'll be expected to wield it without hesitation. Morning arrives not with gentle birdsong, but with the clang of a bell so loud you nearly fling your dagger at the wall. You drag yourself into the courtyard where a line of recruits already waits, cloaks heavy with dew, eyes half-lidded from another restless night. Today the instructors have a different lesson, not about weapons, not about walls, but about your stomach. Because apparently, if you're going to be an assassin, you first have to survive breakfast. The food is set out on wooden tables that sag like they're apologizing for what they carry. A bowl of lentils, a loaf of bread as dense as stone, and a jug of watered-down wine. That's it. No roasted meats, no piles of fruit. You sit, break the bread, and nearly chip a tooth. Chewing feels like a sparring match between your molars and the dough. The wine washes it down, though calling it wine is generous. It tastes like someone whispered the word grape into a bucket of river water. This is where the romance of assassin life really takes a dive. You may think blades and secrets, daring missions. But the truth? You're eating scraps and trying not to gag. A mainstream historical fact helps ground this. Most medieval peasants and soldiers alike lived primarily on bread, gruel, and watered beer or wine. Assassins were no exception. Their lodges and fortresses weren't luxury hotels, they were stocked with basics that kept you alive but never comfortable. A quirky tidbit slips in here. Some fortresses apparently kept pigeons not only for messages but also for meat. Imagine sitting down to a meal where the bird that delivered your master's last order is now the main course. Not exactly the loyalty program you'd hope for. Still, hunger is a teacher. You learn to swallow disappointment with every bite. Some nights you're lucky enough to get goat stew, though it's so fatty it leaves you burping smoke until dawn. Her times, it's dried fish carried up the mountain, salted to the point where your lips sting. You joke with another recruit that it's less fish and more portable ocean. He laughs so hard, water sprays from his nose, which on the bright side briefly seasons his bread. But food isn't the only discomfort. The sleeping arrangements continue to test your willpower. Straw mats that smell faintly of mold, scratchy wool blankets that leave your skin itching, and the occasional rat bold enough to scurry across your chest in the dark. You roll over, swatting at it, only to hear your bunkmate mutter, "Don't bother, that one's part of the furniture now." Historians still argue whether these hardships were intentional training or just the reality of mountain living. Some suggest Hassani Saba deliberately kept comforts scarce to harden his followers. Others think resources were simply limited. Remote fortresses weren't exactly on Amazon Prime delivery routes. Whatever the case, discomfort became a constant, an extra layer of discipline baked into daily survival. And the smells, oh the smells. Without modern hygiene, sweat, smoke and damp wool blend into a perfume that would clear any banquet hall. You lie awake sometimes, listening to snores, inhaling the air and wondering whether invisibility is easier when people are too busy holding their noses. But strangely, the misery bonds you. Over a shared bowl of watery stew, you and the others exchange complaints, jokes, even dreams. One swears that when he finishes his service, he'll open a bakery with pastries so soft no one will ever risk losing a tooth again. Another promises to become a merchant and import spices so every meal tastes like more than boiled sadness. You laugh with them because the only alternative is groaning, and groaning gets you extra chores. One evening, the fortress cook serves bread so burned it crumbles into charcoal. You look at your portion, raise it like a trophy, and announce, finally, a weapon and a meal in one. The recruits around you chuckle. Even the dour instructor cracks half a smile. In a world where shadows are your profession, comedy becomes survival too. Yet, as the days pass, you notice your body adapting. The bread may be brick hard, but your jaw grows stronger. The wine may taste like vinegar, but it keeps thirst at bay. The stew may be bland, but it fuels you for another night's climb, another day's drill. Slowly, the discomfort becomes routine. You realize with a shiver, this is how the Brotherhood molds you, not just with blades and doctrine, but by teaching you to endure. And so, every time you lift that cracked wooden bowl, you're not just eating, you're proving you can swallow anything no matter how bitter. And in the life ahead, you'll need that skill more than the sharpest dagger. The days blur into drills, climbs, and bowls of watery stew, but tonight the instructors drag out something new: disguises. Not glamorous costumes, not flowing capes or dazzling masks, but a pile of robes so plain you almost laugh. The heap looks like laundry day in a monastery, and yet you're told this scratchy beige sackcloth is the most powerful weapon you'll ever wear. You pull one over your head. It smells faintly of smoke and sheep, and the wool scratches so insistently you wonder if this is the secret punishment no historian ever bothered to record. You try not to claw at your neck as the instructor explains that blending in means giving up individuality. Forget shining armor, forget embroidered silks. You need to look like the kind of person nobody remembers 2 minutes later. In other words, welcome to medieval camouflage, otherwise known as being aggressively boring. A mainstream historical fact slots in here. Assassins often disguised themselves as merchants, servants, or pilgrims, allowing them to infiltrate cities and even noble courts without drawing suspicion. Robes were the simplest trick. They turned anyone into a face in the crowd, whether you were delivering grain or plotting regicide. The instructor tosses you a battered wool cap, tugging it down over your ears until you resemble a weary shepherd who's just lost his last goat. The look doesn't exactly scream deadly agent, but that's the point. You glance at your fellow recruits, now dressed as bland monks, tired tradesmen, or, in one unlucky case, a washerwoman complete with headscarf. The laughter bubbles up despite the seriousness, because nothing kills intimidation faster than seeing your roommate in a floral kerchief. Still, humour aside, you begin to see the genius. With your face shadowed, posture slouched, and steps slowed, you become invisible. You shuffle past a guard in the courtyard, and he doesn't even glance up, too busy picking his teeth with a splinter. That's when it clicks. Power doesn't always come from swords. Sometimes it comes from the itchy robe that lets you walk unchallenged. A quirky tidbit surfaces here. Some medieval sources suggest assassins occasionally disguise themselves as Sufi mystics or dervishes, relying on the natural respect given to holy wanderers. Imagine slipping through a crowded street while humming a prayer tune, and everyone steps aside, none the wiser that you've got a dagger hidden under your sleeve. But disguises aren't just clothes. You're taught to mimic mannerisms, how to bow like a servant, haggle like a merchant, or shuffle like a pilgrim who's walked 1,000 miles. One evening, the recruits practice in the courtyard, each taking on a role. You spend half an hour arguing the price of onions with another trainee until you forget you're rehearsing. The instructors nod approvingly. Invisibility isn't about fabric, it's about performance. Historians still argue whether disguises were truly central to assassin tactics, or whether chroniclers exaggerated their use to paint them as supernatural infiltrators. But you, standing here scratching at your wool robe, know at least one thing is true. Nobody pays attention to the boring man in the corner, and that boredom might just save your life. Night comes, and the drills grow stranger. You're told to swap disguises at random and slip into the fortress kitchens, unseen. You shuffle past the cook, holding a basket of onions, and for a heart-stopping second, you're sure he's seen through you. But he only waves you toward the pantry. Success. Your heart pounds, but not from climbing cliffs. This is a different kind of survival, one where invisibility is both terrifying and exhilarating. And of course, the jokes follow. Back in your cell, one recruit mutters, "I looked so convincing as a pilgrim I nearly donated money to myself." Another swears his washerwoman disguise worked too well. An instructor actually asked him to scrub floors. You laugh until your sides ache because humor keeps the scratchy robes from driving you mad. But beneath the laughter, you feel a shift. Once you wanted to stand out, to prove yourself. Now you're learning the deadliest skill is being forgettable. The cloak may itch, the cap may stink, but together they cloak you in a kind of power knights in armor can never wield, the power of going unnoticed. As you fold the robes at the end of the night, you imagine the day when you'll wear them not in drills but on real streets. You'll pass through markets, bow in noble halls, shuffle by guards who won't remember your face. And in that moment, your scratchy, sheep-scented disguise will be worth more than any jeweled blade. By now the fortress has sanded down your edges. You chew rock-hard bread without complaint. You climb walls until your arms ache like stretched bowstrings, and you scratch at woolen robes with the acceptance of a man who knows he'll never be comfortable again. But tonight, something shifts. Instead of climbing drills or rope knots, the instructors summon you to a quiet chamber lined with scrolls. On the table lies a sealed letter wax-stamped with a mark you don't recognize. The instructor's voice is calm, almost casual. Every path forward begins with orders from afar. You pick up the letter and for a moment it feels heavier than the dagger at your hip. This is what your training has been leading toward. Not random practice, but assignments. Directives sent down from masters you've never met, men who sit in distant towers and decide which lives should continue and which should not. You break the seal and scan the script. The name is unfamiliar, the reasons vague. A merchant accused of betrayal, a noble rumoured to plot against the Brotherhood's allies. The details are foggy, intentionally so. You're not told why, only who. That's the unsettling beauty of it. Obedience doesn't require explanations. Here's your historical anchor, the Nizari Ismaili network spread across the Middle East, with emissaries and messengers carrying secret letters from fortress to city. Orders often came sealed, sometimes only partially explained, so that the operative understood just enough to act but not enough to betray wider strategy if captured. The instructor explains another cruel truth. Assignments aren't always swift. Sometimes you receive a name and wait weeks, months even, before conditions align. That means blending in, earning trust, standing idle until the right moment comes. You realize the job is less about sudden action and more about patience, like being a fisherman who waits all day for one unlucky bite. A quirky tidbit fits here. Some legends claim that orders were sometimes disguised as harmless notes, recipes, verses of poetry, or even shopping lists. Imagine being handed a parchment that reads, "Buy onions, grind cumin, sharpen dagger," subtlety, medieval style. The more you think about it, the more unsettling it feels. Back in the city, you saw nobles laughing over wine, guards bickering over dice. Any one of them might already have a sealed letter with their name on it sitting in some fortress. You wonder if your name might one day appear on a different recruit's parchment. The thought makes your throat dry. Historians still argue whether assassins always believed in their missions or whether some carried them out reluctantly, obeying out of fear rather than faith. Tonight, staring at that sealed letter, you feel the weight of both possibilities pressing into your chest. Faith makes the task seem noble. Fear makes refusal unthinkable. Either way, the wax has broken, and the order is real. You tuck the letter into your robe and shuffle back to your cell. The wind rattles the shutters, carrying with it the howl of wolves in the distance. You lie awake, picturing the faceless master who wrote the order. Did he pause before writing the name? Did he feel the same unease you feel now? Probably not. Power numbs the conscience. Orders flow downhill like icy mountain streams, and you are the pebble carried in the current. In the days that follow, you practice scenarios in your head. If the target is a merchant, you'll pose as a porter. If it's a noble, you'll be a servant carrying wine. You rehearse bows, smiles, forgettable greetings. Every interaction becomes practice, as though the whole fortress is a stage and you're learning lines you'll one day need to survive. One evening, while you sit sharpening your blade, another recruit nudges you. "Do you ever wonder," he whispers, "if the letters are even real? What if they're just tests?" You shrug, though the thought sticks. Historians still argue whether some orders were staged, designed to test loyalty rather than demand blood. If so, you realize the real trick isn't killing, it's proving you'll do it if asked. That night, as the wind roars outside, you hold the letter under your pillow. The wax is broken, the ink already fading, but the name lingers in your mind. You don't know the target, and maybe you never will. But the act of holding the order, of being trusted or condemned to carry it out, changes you. You are no longer just a recruit learning how to climb or disguise. You are a blade waiting for a signal, sharpened by distance and sealed in wax. The sealed letters keep arriving, each one stamped with a different mark, each one carrying names that blur together in your memory. You're told only the basics, enough to guide your disguise and approach, but never enough to know the full story. That ignorance is deliberate. Tonight, however, your path takes you out of the fortress and into a noble's court, a place where candles drip wax onto marble floors and the air hums with ambition. You walk through the city gates disguised as a servant. The wool robe itches, the cap slides into your eyes, but no one gives you a second glance. You carry a tray of figs and almonds, borrowed from the market, as your excuse to move freely. The noble's palace rises ahead, its towers lit by lanterns, its windows alive with music. You slip in with a group of other attendants, and suddenly you're inside a world of velvet, perfume, and lies. The court is loud with chatter. Lutes strum in the corner, courtiers laugh too brightly, and nobles sip wine from cups that sparkle under the glow of chandeliers. For a moment you're dizzy from the sensory overload after weeks of fortress silence. Here, every gesture feels exaggerated, every word heavy with double meaning. You realize quickly you don't just need to look like a servant, you need to think like one, invisible but alert. A mainstream historical fact anchors you here. Assassins were known to infiltrate courts and gatherings, sometimes waiting days or even weeks before striking. Unlike mercenaries who fought in open battle, these operatives specialized in patience and subtlety, biding their time until the perfect moment presented itself. You shuffle with the other attendants, bowing when expected, offering figs when commanded. Your eyes, however, stay busy. You note where the guards stand, how often they patrol, which exits stay unlocked. You memorize the noble's gestures, the way he leans toward one ally, dismisses another with a flick of his ringed hand. All of this becomes part of your silent map, your escape plan sketched in candlelight. But of course, absurdity creeps in too. At one point, a drunken lord waves you over, demanding you taste his wine first to prove it isn't poisoned. You hesitate for half a beat, wondering if this is irony or bad luck. Then you sip. The sour tang makes you wince, and he bursts into laughter. "See? Safe!" he roars, sloshing half the cup onto your robe. You retreat, muttering to yourself that poison is suddenly the least of your worries. Wine stains are forever. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Medieval courts often employed tasters for exactly this reason. The irony, tasters themselves occasionally became the targets, pawns caught in a deadly game they didn't sign up for. Imagine explaining that job listing. Wanted, someone willing to maybe die daily so my dinner is safe. Back in the hall, the music softens, and a hush spreads. The noble rises, giving a speech thick with praise for allies and veiled threats for enemies. You stand still, tray in hand, but your mind hums. Somewhere in the folds of your robe lies a blade. Somewhere in the letter, tucked at your side, lies a name, and somewhere in this hall is the reason you're here. Historians still argue whether assassins struck quickly during such gatherings or whether they preferred to lure targets into private chambers. Tonight you feel both options vibrating in the air. A sudden move could end it in seconds, but so could waiting for a quieter moment when the guards relax and the wine runs deeper. You glide past a cluster of courtiers debating politics. One mutters about the Mongols, another about taxation, but you catch a whisper about mountain men and daggers in the dark. Your ears prickle. Even here, amid gold and laughter, the fear of your order bleeds into conversation. You're both ghost and rumour, living proof that the whispers aren't entirely baseless. The hours drag, candles burn low, dripping wax like slow clocks counting down. You refill goblets, carry trays, bow and bow again. Your back aches from standing, but you don't complain. To complain would be to be noticed, and to be noticed is death. You remember the instructor's words, the most powerful disguise is forgettability. At one point you find yourself staring at a tapestry depicting knights battling demons. The demons wear twisted faces, claws outstretched. You smirk softly because you know the real monsters don't roar, they pass figs in silence waiting for a signal. By the time the gathering winds down, your tray is empty, your robes soaked with wine and sweat and your patience stretched like taut bowstring. Yet you leave unnoticed, slipping into the night with the noble's voice still ringing in your ears. You didn't act tonight, your orders haven't ripened yet, but you carried the blade and that was enough. On the road back, you wonder if this is the truest assassin's art, not the strike itself, but the discipline to wait in plain sight, invisible and ordinary, until history tilts on the edge of your dagger. The fortress sends you out again, but this time not to candlelit courts or crowded feasts. Tonight your path winds toward a looming citadel, its towers jutting from a cliff like jagged teeth. From the valley floor it seems impossibly far, a wall of stone fused with the mountain itself. The order is simple enough. Get inside. The method, that's on you. You crouch in the shadows, waiting for the moon to slip behind clouds. The air is sharp with pine and damp stone, and the silence feels heavier than armor. You glance at the coil of rope looped over your shoulder, the iron hook cold against your fingers. It looks laughably inadequate compared to the walls ahead. You whisper a little prayer, half reverent, half sarcastic, and begin the climb. Your boots find narrow holes, your fingers scrape against rough stone. Every shift sends pebbles skittering into the darkness, and you pause, heart pounding, imagining guards turning toward the sound. But the night is kind. The only response is the wind whistling through arrow slits high above. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. Chroniclers recorded that Nizari assassins scaled fortifications to infiltrate or escape, often under cover of night. Their fortresses themselves, like Alamut, were renowned for being nearly impossible to assault, yet perfectly designed to train men in impossible climbs. Tonight, you feel both sides of that truth. Halfway up, your arm muscles quiver, sweat stings your eyes. You cling to the wall, panting, whispering encouragement to yourself like a desperate coach. You imagine slipping, your body bouncing off the cliff, your story ending as nothing more than a red smear at the valley floor. And you laugh softly because really, what a ridiculous obituary. Aspiring assassin fails climbing lesson, dies heroically in goat pasture. The higher you climb, the stranger the thoughts get. You notice carvings in the stone, graffiti left by bored guards perhaps, or masons centuries earlier. One crude drawing looks suspiciously like a donkey with enormous ears. You almost lose your grip from snickering. Apparently, medieval humour lives on, scratched into the same walls that now carry your weight. A quirky tidbit slides in. Some castles actually encouraged guards to leave small carvings as a form of claiming loyalty. Imagine signing in at work, but instead of a timesheet, you doodle a very bad goat on the fortress wall. You push onward. The rope digs into your shoulders, your fingers ache, but finally you reach the ledge beneath a guard tower. You flatten yourself, breath shallow, listening. Two guards shuffle above, their voices carrying on the wind. They complain about the wine ration, about sore feet, about how boring it is to stand watch while mountain ghosts supposedly prowl below. You smirk. If only they knew how accurate their fears were tonight. Historians still argue whether assassins relied more on stealth or on disguises once inside enemy strongholds. Some claim they blended in as servants, others insist they simply vanished into unused corridors. Tonight you find both possibilities tempting, but for now you stay frozen, part of the stone itself, until the guards wander off. You haul yourself up the final stretch, slipping silently into a narrow window. Inside, the air is stale with smoke and old hay. The room is empty, just broken crates and a tangle of rope left by someone careless. You crouch, letting your breathing slow, and feel that peculiar thrill. The wall was meant to keep you out, and yet here you are, tucked into its heart like a whisper. Moving deeper, you notice the fortress smells different from Alamut. Less incense, more sweat. This is an enemy's stronghold, and you are an intruder. Every creak of wood, every flicker of torchlight feels like it's aimed at you. Yet you glide forward, robes brushing the stone, dagger warm against your hip. And still, absurd moments creep in. You pass a storeroom where sacks of grain slump against each other, and your stomach growls so loudly you freeze, certain it will give you away. For a long moment you stand there, arguing silently with your own belly. Now? Really? You pick now to betray me? Luckily, no one hears. Finally, you reach an inner courtyard. From here, you can see the heart of the fortress. Guards at their posts, fires glowing, banners hanging limp in the breeze. You crouch in the shadows, realizing that every fortress you infiltrate will feel the same. An impossible wall, a desperate climb, a stolen heartbeat of triumph inside enemy lines. You slip back before dawn, retracing your steps down the wall, rope whispering against stone. When your boots finally touch grass again, you exhale a laugh you didn't know you'd been holding. You survived, and the citadel still stands above, unaware it was just breached by someone in an itchy robe carrying a half-dull dagger. That's the assassin's paradox. The walls look eternal, but the cracks are always there, and tonight you've learned to slip through them. The fortress fades behind you as dawn breaks, but the lesson of scaling walls lingers in your trembling arms. Not every mission, though, demands climbing into guarded strongholds. Sometimes the assignment pulls you into the very heart of life itself, the bustling, noisy, chaotic marketplace. And in many ways, these are more dangerous. Why? Because here, you aren't just dodging armored guards, you're navigating gossiping merchants, braying donkeys, and sharp-eyed children who notice everything. You step into the market at midday. The air hums with voices layered on top of each other. Vendors hawking salted fish, women bargaining for bread, children darting between stalls. Spices tickle your nose, smoke from roasting meat curls upward, and someone nearby is loudly insisting his onions are bigger than anyone else's. Invisibility here doesn't come from shadows, it comes from blending into a sea of humanity. You walk slowly, clutching a basket as your cover. Your robe is plain, your head bowed, yet your eyes scan constantly. You're not here for figs or cloth, you're here for someone specific, someone whose name came wax-sealed on a piece of parchment. A mainstream historical fact anchors this scene. Assassins were known to strike in public, even in marketplaces, using the anonymity of crowds as both cover and chaos. Records describe officials cut down during prayers, sermons, or city gatherings. Places meant to be safe suddenly turned to panic. But as you weave among merchants, you realize the risk. One wrong glance, one moment of hesitation, and you'll stand out. You pass a spice seller, his table piled high with saffron, cumin, and cinnamon. He eyes you suspiciously, muttering that pilgrims never carry baskets. You mutter something about delivering offerings and shuffle off, heart thudding. It's a reminder, every ordinary person could be your undoing. And yet, Comedy Lou, Arcas even in this tense work. You nearly trip over a donkey stubbornly planted in the middle of the road, chewing hay with the smugness of someone who knows he owns the street. You whisper, "Move, friend, or we'll both be late for destiny." But the donkey flicks an ear and refuses. A child laughs at your expense, and you grin back weakly. So much for blending in. A quirky tidbit fits here. In some medieval cities, donkeys and pigs roamed freely in marketplaces, often more disruptive than pickpockets. Records even note court cases where wandering pigs knocked over stalls, causing massive brawls. Imagine trying to carry out a secret mission while livestock is staging a slapstick riot around you. You steady yourself, focusing on the flow. At a fruit stall, you spot the man whose name was inked onto your order. He's ordinary, unremarkable, arguing over the price of apples. For a moment, the absurdity strikes you. History paints assassins as sinister figures, yet here you are, basket in hand, staring at a man haggling about apples. Historians still argue whether assassins always carried out their missions in these crowded places or whether chroniclers exaggerated to make the group seem more terrifying. But even standing here, you understand the truth. The possibility was enough. Fear doesn't need statistics. It thrives on whispers. You drift closer, pretending to admire pomegranates. The dagger in your sleeve feels heavier with each step. Around you, life continues. Someone shouting about cloth prices, a woman scolding her child, a stray dog yapping at a chicken. You wonder, if you acted now, would anyone even notice? Or would the market swallow the moment in its chaos? The crowd jostles, pressing you closer to your target. For a second, your eyes meet his. He doesn't recognize you. Why would he? To him, you're just another pilgrim, another face he'll forget. That's the disguise working, and it chills you. You could be anyone, and so could the blade in the crowd beside him. But today, no strike comes. The order isn't yet ripe. You're told to observe, to learn routines, to melt back into the masses. So you do. You trail the man long enough to memorize his gait, his voice, the way he scratches his beard when thinking. Then you van-eye into an alley, just another shadow slipping into the city's veins. By the time you return to the fortress, your robe smells like spices and sweat, your basket is empty, and your nerves buzz like you've been balancing on a knife edge all day. You realize the marketplace is both stage and trap. Here, anonymity is power, but one clumsy step, one stubborn donkey, and everything could unravel. Still, as you collapse onto your straw mat that night, you can't help but smirk. For all the danger, there's something almost comical about playing deadly shadow games while dodging pigs and haggling merchants. The market may never know the role it plays in history, but you do. And the whispers of daggers in daylight will ripple long after you're gone. You return to the fortress after the market, legs sore from weaving through crowds, brain still buzzing with the memory of faces that blurred together. Life doesn't pause here. It contracts, compressing back into the tight stone walls where every moment is either training or waiting. Weeks begin to stretch like candle wax, dripping one after another, each day nearly indistinguishable from the last. Your quarters remain the same, a cramped stone cell with straw that crunches whenever you turn, and a blanket scratchy enough to exfoliate you in your sleep. You share the room with two other recruits, both snoring in competing rhythms that could probably confuse enemy scouts if weaponized properly. You try stuffing wool in your ears once, but the itch is worse than the snores, so you resign yourself to nightly serenades. Meals blur together too. More lentils, more stale bread, sometimes goat stew so oily you joke that one spark might set the dining hall ablaze. You laugh at your own joke, but nobody else does. They're too busy trying to chew their bread into submission. Still, humour becomes your seasoning. Without it, everything tastes like resignation. Here's your historical anchor. Assassin lodges and fortresses functioned as both training centres and living quarters, often isolated in mountainous terrain. Life inside was austere, more like a monastery than a soldier's barracks, with strict discipline and very little comfort. Boredom, however, becomes its own test. Hours pass where you sit, waiting for orders, staring at stone walls. You carve little shapes into the wooden edge of your bed, stars, daggers, once even a crude goat that makes your bunkmates snort. The monotony presses on you like the mountain's weight itself. You realize this is part of the discipline, learning to live in patience, to let your mind sharpen instead of dull. And yet absurdity creeps in ever. Beware. One night the roof leaks after a storm, dripping steadily onto your forehead. You try shifting your mat, but no matter where you move, the water follows like some malevolent raindrop spirit. By dawn, you're drenched, and your bunkmates laugh so hard they nearly choke on their breakfast. A quirky tidbit adds flavour. Some chronicles mention that fortresses like Alamut kept libraries with texts on philosophy, astronomy, and science. Imagine that, spending half your day training with daggers and the other half reading about the stars. You wonder if any assassin ever accidentally mixed up his notes and tried to stab someone with a telescope. Historians still argue whether recruits genuinely had access to such scholarship or whether only higher-ranking members did. But even if the rumours are exaggerated, you sense the truth. These fortresses were more than hideouts. They were communities, each with its own rhythm of learning, training, and waiting. You spend evenings in the common hall with the other recruits. The fire smokes more than it warms, but you gather around it anyway, swapping stories. One brags about climbing a wall without rope, another about sneaking past a guard unnoticed. You grin and add, "I survived the leaky roof," which earns a round of chuckles. Small victories, after all, are still victories. Sometimes boredom makes you inventive. You and a friend fashion dice from goat bones, scratching symbols into them with your daggers. You play late into the night, betting scraps of bread or promises to fetch water. Once you lose so badly you owe latrine duty for a week, which feels like both punishment and comedy. But beneath the laughter and monotony, tension hums. You all know that sooner or later, another letter will arrive, another name will be inked, and one of you will be called to vanish into the world. You glance around the smoky hall, realizing not all of you will return. The walls feel closer after that thought, the fire less comforting. You lie on your mat, listening to the fortress breathe, the creak of wood, the shuffle of guards, the distant howl of wolves. You remind yourself that the boredom, the leaky roof, even the goat stew are all part of the same contract. This is the price of being forged into something both invisible and unforgettable. And strangely, in the quiet, you begin to feel it working. The walls don't suffocate quite as much. The straw itches, but you sleep anyway. The bread is hard, but you chew it down. Survival in the fortress isn't dramatic, it's persistence. And persistence, you realize, is what makes shadows last. The fortress nights drag on with their dripping roofs and echoing snores, but rumours always slip in like drafts through the cracks. Around the fire one evening, a senior recruit leans closer, voice low, and mutters about the gardens of paradise. He describes fountains flowing with honey, maidens with eyes brighter than the moon, and recruits drugged with a mysterious potion, hashish, that carried them there. You blink, trying to process whether he's joking, delirious, or just bored of goat stew. Here's the mainstream historical fact. The very word assassin is often linked to hashashin, a term some chroniclers use to accuse the Nizari Ismailis of drug use. Supposedly, initiates were intoxicated and then shown lush gardens to trick them into believing obedience would grant them paradise after death. It's a gripping story. Except historians still argue whether it's true or pure propaganda spread by terrified enemies. The recruits around you whisper excitedly, trading half-baked details. One insists the gardens were hidden inside the fortress, behind locked gates. Another swears he overheard a master say paradise could only be reached with the right green potion. You sit there, chewing on a crust of bread so hard it might actually break a tooth, and wonder if anyone would really trade paradise for this. A quirky tidbit here: travellers like Marco Polo claim to have seen or heard of these supposed gardens, describing them in almost fairy tale terms, but considering Marco Polo also wrote about unicorns that were clearly rhinos, you're not sure how reliable his midnight storytelling really was. Later that night, you test the rumour yourself. A fellow recruit smuggles in dried herbs, harmless ones, more likely to make you sneeze than dream. You chew them anyway, just to see, but the only paradise you reach is an upset stomach and a desperate sprint to the latrine. Your friends laugh so hard they nearly fall off their mats, one clutching his side, gasping, "Truly, brother, you've glimpsed the hereafter." Yet behind the laughter, the tale lingers. You imagine what it would be like if the gardens were real. A world of green after weeks of grey stone, laughter instead of discipline, warmth instead of icy winds. You picture yourself reclining beside a fountain, dagger forgotten, breathing in jasmine instead of mould. For a moment, you ache with longing for something you know probably doesn't exist. The masters never confirm nor deny the rumours. They let the stories swirl, feeding fear and loyalty alike. And you realise, with a shiver, that sometimes a myth is more powerful than any blade. The thought that paradise might await can push men to climb walls, to swallow fear, to strike without hesitation. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It works. Historians still argue whether the label hashashin was a smear tactic by rivals or a real reflection of fortress practices. But lying in your straw mat that night, stomach still unsettled, you know one thing: the myth shapes you as much as any weapon. You don't need to see the gardens to feel their pull. The idea is enough. Still, sarcasm sneaks in. As you close your eyes, you mutter to yourself, if paradise means more lenti, elves and itchy blankets, I'm already halfway there. The bunkmate beside you snorts awake, and you both laugh quietly until sleep finally drags you under. The myth of paradise still lingers in your head as dawn breaks, but reality pulls you back fast. Morning prayers echo through the stone halls, the words familiar by now, chanted in unison until the fortress vibrates with devotion. You kneel among the others, the cold floor pressing against your knees, and you realize that here, faith isn't just belief, it's architecture, woven into every corridor, every ritual, every order. The masters speak often of duty to God, of loyalty to the imam, of sacrifice for the community. Their voices carry conviction so strong it almost drowns out your doubts. Almost. Because while your lips form the prayers, your mind drifts. Is this about religion or politics dressed up in holy robes? Historians still argue whether the Nizari assassins were truly religious zealots or more pragmatic political actors cloaked in faith. From where you kneel, it feels like both. A mainstream fact supports this. Hassani Saba, founder of the order, emphasized absolute devotion to the Ismaili Imam. Recruits were taught to obey commands as sacred duty, blurring the line between faith and obedience until they became indistinguishable. And here you are, living proof of that blurring. You can't tell whether you pray out of conviction or fear. After prayers, the day splits into lessons. Sometimes it's scripture, sometimes it's political talk about kings, caliphs, and crusaders. The instructors remind you constantly, the world beyond these mountains is fractured, and your blade serves to keep balance, or at least the balance your masters prefer. You scribble notes, though your quill scratches more slowly when they begin praising obedience above thought. A quirky tidbit sneaks in here. Medieval Ismaili texts weren't all fire and brimstone. Some fragments reveal surprisingly philosophical debates on astronomy, on logic, on ethics. Imagine sitting through Dagger Dr. Ills in the morning, then spending the afternoon arguing whether stars influence destiny. The whiplash could give anyone a headache. But faith isn't only in words, it's in tests. One evening, the master poses a question. Would you leap from this wall if ordered? The courtyard hushes. You glance at the drop, the rocks waiting below, and your stomach knots. No one moves, but the silence itself becomes an answer. You realize it's less about actually leaping and more about proving your mind is prepared. Still, the fact that the question even exists chills you. That night, whispers ripple through the dormitory. Some recruits claim they would jump without hesitation. Others mutter they'd at least check for hay first. You laugh at that joke, but the unease stays. The thought that blind faith could demand blind death is heavier than any blade. Yet you also see conviction's power. In prayer, the recruits' voices swell together, strong enough to echo across the valley. In moments of doubt, you catch glimpses of men who truly believe, whose eyes burn with purpose. It makes you wonder, is your own hesitation weakness or simply honesty? Historians still argue whether assassins like you saw themselves as martyrs, political pawns, or something in between, but as you kneel again on the cold floor, you realize faith here isn't optional. It's stitched into survival. To question too loudly would be to exile yourself not just from the fortress but from the very idea of belonging. Later, alone in your cell, you press your palm against the stone wall. It's rough, unyielding, permanent. You whisper the prayers again, softer this time, uncertain whether they're for God, for your masters, or just for yourself. The line is blurred, and maybe that's the point. You smirk faintly as sleep tugs at you. If paradise is real, you mutter, I hope it at least comes with softer beds. The thought makes you chuckle, even as your stomach knots again with doubt. Faith may steady others, but for you, it remains both anchor and chain. Days in the fortress settle into their rhythm, prayers, drills, lentils, snores. But whenever the messengers arrive with letters, everything shifts. The scraps of parchment might be small, but they ripple outward, changing fates across kingdoms. One evening, as you sit near the smoky hearth, the master reads aloud the newest orders, and you realize just how tangled the Brotherhood's web has become. The target this time isn't a petty merchant or rival guard captain. It's someone with a crown, or at least someone who whispers into a crowned ear. You hear names spoken, princes, viziers, bishops, men whose deaths would shake thrones. Suddenly you see the politics more clearly. Every dagger stroke, every vial of poison, every staged disappearance isn't random. It's a lever, nudging kingdoms one way or another. A mainstream historical fact grounds this. Medieval records blame the Nizari Ismaili assassins for the deaths of high-ranking figures, from Seljuk viziers to Crusader lords. Chroniclers claimed kings trembled at the thought of waking to a dagger in their chambers. Whether exaggerated or not, the political ripples were undeniable. But the propaganda is thicker than goat stew. From pulpits and palaces alike, rulers accuse the assassins of every shadow, every sudden death. If a noble falls from a horse, it's an assassin's plot. If a minister chokes on a chicken bone, surely it was poison. You smirk bitterly, realizing the Brotherhood's reputation has become both weapon and curse. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some European chroniclers insisted assassins could walk through walls or vanish into thin air. You glance at your own itchy robe and chipped dagger, thinking, if I can vanish, it's only because nobody wants to look at me. Still, the myth spreads, and fear multiplies faster than truth. Historians still argue whether the assassins were truly a far-reaching political force, or whether their enemies inflated their legend to justify wars and crackdowns. Sitting here by the smoky fire, you realize the truth might be both. A handful of precise strikes magnified by endless rumors, making kings paranoid enough to see daggers in every shadow. You lean back, listening to the recruits around you. Some glow with pride at the idea of shaping politics. Others, like you, feel the weight of it pressing down. It's one thing to climb a wall or don a disguise. It's another to topple empires with a blade. You wonder if anyone in this smoky hall actually believes their hand steers history, or if you're all just pawns in a larger game played by unseen masters. And yet you can't deny the power. Fear itself becomes a form of governance. The masters don't need to kill every rival, they just need rulers to believe they could. That paranoia keeps kings awake at night, keeps viziers checking shadows, keeps armies hesitant. Invisibility is its own empire. Later, as you stretch out on your straw mat, you think of the noble you once served wine to, the merchant you followed through the market, the guards you slipped past on the wall. None of them know your name. None of them know how close the Brotherhood already stood. And maybe that's the point. History remembers kings and crusaders, but behind them, invisible hands tug at threads until the whole fabric shifts. You chuckle softly, though it feels a little grim. If a king falls in the forest and nobody writes it down, did an assassin still push him? Your bunkmate groans at the joke, but you smile anyway. Politics, you realize, may be lofty business, but in the shadows, it's stitched together by ordinary men with ordinary blades and extraordinary patience. The fortress walls echo with talk of kings and viziers, but down in the valleys another kind of enemy lurks, loud, armoured, and far less subtle. Knights, mercenaries, crusaders, men who prefer their battles loud and their reputations louder. The Brotherhood has no love for them, and truth be told, the feeling is mutual. You find yourself crossing paths with these iron-clad brutes more often than you'd like, and every meeting feels like a clash of two worlds, steel thundering against silence. On one mission, you shadow a caravan of Crusader knights making their way toward Jerusalem. Their armor glints under the sun like walking chandeliers, each step jangling with the weight of chainmail and spurs. You trail them from a distance, your plain robe swallowing you into the landscape. They laugh, drink, boast of victories, and occasionally hurl insults at passing peasants. Subtlety is not in their vocabulary. A mainstream historical fact grounds this. Records show that assassins sometimes targeted knights and crusader leaders, including prominent figures like Conrad of Montferrat. To armoured warriors, assassins were cowards, striking in shadows, refusing to fight honourably. To assassins, knights were lumbering targets, loud enough to be heard a mile away, more dangerous in groups than in thought. Still, you can't help noticing the rivalry breeds a strange sort of comedy. One knight in particular spends half an hour bragging about his sword, which he names Dragon's Fang. You whisper under your breath, more like Dragon's Toothpick, and nearly choke when the squire polishing the blade sneezes on it. You mutter silently, "Fear us, mighty crusaders vanquished by pollen." A quirky tidbit slips in. Some mercenaries in medieval Europe were known for switching sides mid-battle if paid more. Imagine planning a grand ambush, only to discover the hired swords have suddenly Did they like your enemy's purse better? Honor may be heavy in the mouths of knights, but coins were heavier in the pockets of mercenaries. You watch the crusaders thunder into a village demanding supplies. Their armor dazzles, their voices boom, and peasants shrink before them. You realize your order thrives on being the opposite. No dazzle, no boom, just silence that unsettles more deeply than shouting ever could. The contrast sharpens your pride in invisibility, even as you know one wrong move against them could turn you into a pincushion of arrows. Historians still argue whether knights truly feared assassins or dismissed them as nuisances exaggerated by rumor. Some chronicles paint knights as paranoid, sleeping with daggers under their pillows. Others depict them mocking the assassins as vermin. Standing in the shadows, you feel both are true. Knights mock by day, fear by night. One evening, as you pass through the Crusaders' camp disguised as a porter, you overhear them swapping ghost stories. One knight insists assassins can leap roof to roof like cats. Another claims they can't be killed by steel. You smirk beneath your hood, tempted to confirm by juggling daggers theatrically, but you wisely stick to carrying wood for the fires. Sometimes letting myths fester does more damage than truth. Back in the fortress, you and your fellow recruits joke about knights endlessly. One mimics the way they strut, clanking with every step. Another pretends to collapse from exhaustion after walking 5 paces in an imaginary suit of armor. You laugh until tears prick your eyes, the sound bouncing off stone walls. The rivalry may be deadly, but humor turns it into something survivable. Still, you can't ignore the danger. Unlike merchants or courtiers, knights carry walls of iron on their backs. They are trained for open war, and their swords are longer, sharper, heavier than your humble dagger. Facing them directly would be folly. The Brotherhood's strength lies not in brute force, but in knowing when to vanish, when to wait, and when to strike where the armor doesn't reach. As you curl into your straw mat that night, you picture yourself in one of those suits of steel, heavy, clumsy, loud. You chuckle and whisper, if subtlety is a weapon, they're already unarmed. The thought soothes you as sleep creeps in, though you know tomorrow may bring another clash of silence versus steel, and in that clash one misplaced footstep could mean the difference between rumor and obituary. Days stretch into weeks, and not every one of them carries orders, targets, or the adrenaline of scaling walls. Most of the time, fortress life is quiet to the point of absurdity, and the silence starts breeding odd hobbies. You discover quickly that being an assassin isn't a constant parade of danger, it's also long stretches of tedium where you try to stop your brain from melting out of your ears. Your first hobby arrives almost by accident. One evening, you're left alone with a bit of spare wood from the carpenters. Out of sheer boredom, you start whittling with your dagger. The result is, well, let's call it abstract. A crooked goat with one horn larger than the other. Still, when you show it to your bunkmates, they laugh so hard one chokes on his bread. Suddenly, you've found your evening entertainment, carving goats with increasingly ridiculous features. Here's your historical anchor. In many monastic or fortress-like communities, idle hands were kept busy with crafts, wood carving, weaving, or simple handiwork. While no record specifically lists assassins making goat figurines, it's not hard to imagine they passed downtime with similar tasks. Other recruits pick their own pastimes. One becomes obsessed with balancing rocks into little towers, a feat both impressive and maddening when you stumble into them at night. Another fashions dice from sheep bones, scratching symbols into them until a gambling racket takes over the dormitory. Soon the firelit hall echoes with laughter, groans, and shouts of, "You cheated," as bread crusts change hands like poker chips. A quirky tidbit slips in. Archaeologists have found medieval dice with suspicious weighting, suggesting people were cheating even centuries ago. You grin at this, watching your fellow recruit shake the bone dice far too carefully before rolling. You don't call him out, you just quietly bet less when he plays. But hobbies aren't all harmless. Some recruits invent contests to test patience or daring. One game involves holding your hand over a candle flame the longest. The burns are real, the scars proof of pride, and the stupidity undeniable. You pass on that one, muttering that your hand is more useful unroasted. Another pastime? Seeing who can sneak past the fortress guards without being noticed. The winner earns bragging rights, the loser earns latrine duty. You try once, only to be caught when your sneeze echoes through the corridor like a trumpet. Historians still argue whether the Brotherhood cultivated downtime deliberately as part of discipline, or whether recruits simply invented ways to pass endless waiting. From your perspective, boredom becomes its own training. If you can endure monotony without cracking, you can endure long infiltrations in cities, weeks of waiting for the right moment to act. Evenings often dissolve into gossip. Around the smoky fire, recruits trade whispers about nobles they've shadowed, markets they've infiltrated, even rumors about paradise gardens again. Someone insists one of the masters keeps a stash of honey cakes hidden, and for weeks half the recruits scheme to find them. You joke, forget killing kings, our greatest mission is cake theft. Everyone laughs, though one recruit looks suspiciously serious about it. And through it all, humor holds you together. You carve another goat, this one with crossed eyes, and present it dramatically at the gambling table as a guardian of dice. Someone immediately bets a chunk of bread on it, and suddenly you're running a miniature cult around your wooden goat. In a world of daggers and paranoia, a laugh feels like rebellion against the silence. Still, you know the quiet won't last. Letters will come again, names will be inked, and the patience you've honed by carving goats and rolling dice will be tested in shadows far beyond these walls. But tonight, as the fire crackles, you lean back against cold stone, smiling faintly. For a moment, you're not a blade in waiting, you're just a bored human finding ways to stay sane in a world built on silence. The fortress has always felt like the center of your world, perched high above valleys, walls bristling with watchtowers. But rumors slip through even these thick stones, carried by merchants, whispered by travelers, sometimes even muttered by guards when they think no one listens. And lately those whispers carry a name that makes the firelight flicker uneasily: the Mongols. You hear it first from a peddler selling dried figs in the outer courtyard. He claims entire cities have been flattened in the east, walls toppled like children's toys, rivers running red. At first you scoff, rumors are currency and peddlers spend them freely. But then more tales arrive, consistent, relentless. Armies of horsemen moving faster than news itself. Fortresses you once thought impregnable, reduced to smoking rubble in days. A mainstream historical fact anchors your dread. The Mongols under Hulagu Khan launched their campaigns westward in the mid-13th century, crushing cities across Persia and eventually targeting Ismaili fortresses, including Alamut itself. For centuries, the Brotherhood had made enemies of caliphs, sultans, and crusaders, but this new threat was different. The Mongols weren't rattled by whispers, they brought siege engines. At night, you lie on your straw mat, imagining them. Thousands of riders sweeping across plains, dust clouds rising like storms, arrows blotting out the sky. Compared to their sheer scale, your training feels almost laughable. How do itchy robes and hidden daggers stand against a tide of cavalry that never seems to tire? A quirky tidbit creeps in. Mongol riders were rumoured to carry dried meat under their saddles, tenderized as they rode, soft enough to chew at night. You picture an army pausing for dinner, each warrior pulling out a saddle stake, and can't help muttering, "So they conquer kingdoms and invent food hacks." Your bunkmate laughs. But the edge of fear lingers. The masters don't speak openly, but their silence is telling. Training intensifies, fortifications are checked, and messengers hurry in and out like nervous ants. Around the fire, recruits whisper, will the Brotherhood strike first, slipping blades into Mongol camps, or will they retreat deeper into the mountains, trusting in stone walls to resist? Historians still argue whether the assassins attempted diplomacy with the Mongols or relied purely on defense. From your narrow bed, all you know is that waiting feels like suffocation. One morning you climb the battlements during guard duty. From up there the horizon looks endless, calm, no dust clouds, no thunder of hooves, just green valleys stretching far. But that's what terrifies you most, how quickly that calm could shatter. You imagine riding toward the fortress with thousands behind you, siege engines in tow, and wonder, would you feel fear or just inevitability? In the common hall, tension simmers beneath the usual jokes. Dice games fall quieter, wood carvings abandoned half-finished. Even the roof leak doesn't earn its usual grumbles. Everyone senses the same truth. The Brotherhood may thrive in shadows, but shadows can't smother fire and stone forever. That night you dream of walls collapsing. You see yourself clinging to a rope, but instead of climbing up, you're dragged down into dust, the fortress crumbling above you. You wake with your heart hammering, the howl of the wind outside sounding far too much like distant horses. Still, sarcasm shields you, even against dread. Over breakfast you mutter, if the Mongols really do eat meat from under their saddles, maybe they'll choke before they reach us. A few recruits chuckle, grateful for even the flimsiest armor of humor, but in the silence that follows, you all know the truth. The Mongols are coming, and no carved goat or dice game will stop them. The whispers about the Mongols turn to certainty, and soon certainty hardens into dread. Smoke rises from valleys days before riders ever appear, like a warning painted into the sky. When news arrives that fortress after fortress has fallen, the air in Alamut grows thick, every conversation clipped, every prayer louder than usual. The walls, once symbols of invincibility, suddenly feel like waiting tombstones. Orders come swiftly, reinforce gates, ration food, prepare for siege. You carry stones for repair, water skins to storerooms, and bundles of arrows to the towers. Yet no matter how many supplies pile up, it feels like stacking twigs against a flood. The Mongols aren't another noble court to infiltrate or caravan to shadow. They're an avalanche, and you are standing at the bottom of the slope. A mainstream historical fact sets the frame. In 1256, Hulagu Khan's forces targeted the Nizari strongholds, laying siege to castles like Maimun Diz before Alamut itself surrendered. Centuries of careful secrecy unraveled in months under relentless bombardment. Days blur into preparation. You help oil the fortress gates until your arms ache, then haul rocks to line the parapets. At night you join the others on watch, scanning the horizon for the telltale dust cloud. When it finally appears, thick, rolling, stretching from edge to edge, it's worse than imagination. You whisper to yourself, that's not an army, that's the sky falling. And then the siege begins. The first stones crash against the walls, hurled from engines that roar like thunder. Masonry shatters, dust fills the air, men stagger coughing. You duck behind battlements, clutching your dagger, utterly useless against boulders the size of oxen. The noise is constant, wood splintering, walls groaning, arrows whistling. You try to remind yourself that fear is part of the training, but your hands won't stop trembling. A quirky tidbit fits here. Mongol engineers were so skilled at siegecraft that they reportedly used Chinese gunpowder weapons, terrifying defenders unused to fire and noise on such a scale. You imagine hearing explosions for the first time, thinking the heavens themselves were splitting open. You mutter, half panicked, half sarcastic, well, Paradise Gardens sound better by the minute. Inside the fortress, chaos mingles with routine. Cooks still dole out lentils, scribes still whisper prayers, but now everything feels frantic, fragile. You help carry the wounded, their robes torn and faces grey with dust. One man jokes weakly, "At least the bread is harder than their rocks," before coughing blood into his sleeve. The joke hangs heavy in the air, laughter too painful to attempt. Historians still argue whether the Nizari leaders truly believed they could hold against the Mongols, or if surrender was always inevitable. From where you stand, patched robe covered in dust, it feels like defiance and denial were the same thing. Days drag into weeks. Every morning brings new cracks in the walls, new arrows thudding into the courtyard. Sleep comes in snatches, broken by the sound of crashing stone. You carve another goat out of wood, this one cracked down the middle, and leave it on the parapet like a small talisman. It makes you smile for a moment. Then the next boulder smashes nearby, shattering the illusion. Finally the gates groan open, not by choice but by force. The fortress falls. You watch leaders dragged away in chains, libraries pillaged, walls that once seemed eternal crumbling in fire and dust. The brotherhood, built on whispers and daggers, unravels in the roar of siege engines. As you slip into the chaos, blending with survivors, one bitter truth gnaws at you. You were trained to vanish into crowds, to survive in shadows, and that's exactly what you must do now. The fortress is gone, the leaders captured, the creed scattered. All that's left is what you carry within you, dagger, memory, and the discipline to endure. You whisper to yourself as you trudge down the smoking valley, "If walls can fall, maybe shadows can too." But even as you say it, you know the shadows are already gathering again, just smaller, quieter, waiting for another chance to haunt history. The fortress crumbles behind you, its towers now jagged teeth against the smoky sky. You walk away with nothing but the robe on your back and the dagger at your hip. The brotherhood you trained for, prayed with, and joked alongside has shattered. Leaders dragged off in chains, fortresses burned, libraries pillaged. It all feels like a dream you can't quite wake from, and yet your feet keep moving. Survival, after all, is the one lesson etched deepest. You slip into villages, blending with farmers and merchants, becoming what you were always trained to be, invisible. The robe that once marked you as an initiate now marks you as just another weary traveller. You carry sacks of grain, sweep courtyards, and nod to neighbours who never suspect the shadows stitched into your past. Here's a mainstream historical fact. After the Mongol campaigns destroyed the major strongholds, surviving assassins scattered. Some integrated into local communities, others offered their services quietly, and a few drifted into obscurity. The fear of them lingered long after their fortresses fell, proving that reputation can survive even when walls do not. But invisibility has its own price. Nights on straw mats in unfamiliar barns make you ache for the fortress, leaky roof and all. You miss the snoring of bunkmates, the laughter around bone dice, even the endless lentil stew. It's absurd, missing boredom, but loss makes strange companions of memory. A quirky tidbit flickers up. In some places, legends claimed wandering assassins became fortune-tellers or healers using their knowledge of herbs in less dagger-centric ways. You imagine yourself setting up a stall at a market, offering poultices for headaches. Someone whispers, "Careful, he used to be one of them," and suddenly your herbal tea sells out every day. Fear as marketing, it could work. Historians still argue whether survivors remained loyal to the Brotherhood's ideals or whether they melted into ordinary life, abandoning the creed. From where you sit, sharpening your dagger under the dim glow of a hearth fire, you know the truth isn't so neat. You don't forget the training, the rituals, the whispered prayers, but you also don't live by them every day. Instead, you carry them like scars, hidden beneath clothes, visible only when memory pulls them up. You find yourself drifting often. One week you're chopping wood for a farmer, the next you're guarding a caravan, blending with mercenaries who don't ask too many questions. Always you listen for whispers. Always you check for letters that may never come. But sometimes, in the quiet of a village night, you hear laughter spilling from a tavern, see a family huddled by firelight, and for a fleeting moment you imagine a life untouched by shadows, a life where you could admit who you are without flinching. Then you shake it off. The creed taught you to survive, not to dream. And yet, humor never leaves you entirely. One evening, as you muck stalls in a village, a boy asks why your hands are scarred. You glance at your calloused palms, grin and whisper, "I wrestled a goat once. The goat won." The boy laughs, wide-eyed, no clue how close his truth is to being overshadowed by your lies. Survival doesn't come from glory now. It comes from blending, from fading. You're not the figure leaping across rooftops in stories. You're the man carrying onions in the market, the pilgrim muttering prayers, the shadow that people glance past without ever really seeing. And that is exactly how you endure. The Brotherhood may be gone, its castles reduced to rubble, but you carry its fragments, its patience, its silence, its strange mix of faith and fear. You live not as a legend, but as a rumor stretched thin across villages, a whisper that might be true or might be nothing. And perhaps that's what the Brotherhood always was, not walls or leaders, but shadows scattered across history. And now you are one of them. Smoke and memory trail behind you like stubborn shadows, but time does its work. The names of the masters fade, the walls of Alamut are reduced to rubble, and the creed that once felt unshakable becomes just another rumor on travelers' tongues. You keep moving through villages, cities, and valleys, never quite belonging, never quite gone. And everywhere you go, you hear it. The word assassin, reshaped, exaggerated, twisted, until even you barely recognize it. Merchants in bazaars whisper that assassins could turn invisible. Children dare each other to walk alleys at night, convinced cloaked figures wait with poisoned blades. Nobles mutter that the Brotherhood can pierce any court, any palace, no matter how guarded. You sit quietly nearby, chewing bread, robe drawn close, and smirk. If only they knew the truth. Half the time, you were worrying more about stale stew and itchy blankets than about mystical daggers. A mainstream historical fact settles here. After the Mongols scattered the order, legends of the assassins spread wider than their actual reach. Chroniclers in Europe painted them as shadowy fanatics, men who feared no death and could kill kings with a whisper. These stories survived centuries, shaping the very word assassin in modern languages. But you remember the mundane parts, the rope burns, the leaky roofs, the dice games with carved goat figurines. You chuckle softly when you hear someone describe assassins as supernatural beings. If only they could see you now, carrying onions in a basket, muttering sarcastic prayers to stay awake. A quirky tidbit pops up. Some later storytellers even claimed assassins trained with secret manuals full of magical techniques. You nearly choke on your bread when you imagine such a manual. Chapter 1. How to endure itchy robes. Chapter 2. Cooking lentils without crying. Chapter 3. How not to fall off a wall. Reality never makes it into the myths, but maybe that's how legends work. Details get polished until the splinters disappear. Historians still argue whether the assassins were truly a terrifying, disciplined order or mostly a convenient boogeyman for rulers to blame. As you sit by a quiet riverbank, listening to water murmur over stones, you realize it doesn't matter anymore. The Brotherhood's power wasn't in numbers or fortresses. It was in fear. Fear lasts longer than walls, and whispers last longer than truth. You lie back in the grass, staring at stars. They look the same as they did from the fortress battlements, cold and steady. You think of your training partners, some who fell, some who vanished into villages like you. You wonder if they too sit under the same stars, anonymous, listening to stories about themselves told by people who will never know their names. And slowly, your breath steadies. The myths can have their sharp edges and their paradise gardens. You know the truth, the boredom, the scratches, the laughter in smoky halls, the fear that sat heavy as a blade at your throat. You know the humanity behind the legend. Your eyes close, the night hums softly, insects in the grass, river whispering, wind brushing past your cheek. The legends of assassins will keep swirling, twisted, terrifying, larger than life. But you dissolve into the ordinary, just another wanderer drifting through history, carrying shadows that no one else will ever quite see. And maybe that's the truest ending, not a dagger in the dark, but a whisper fading into sleep. Now, as the story fades and the shadows scatter, you let yourself drift. The tension loosens from your shoulders, the stone walls and smoky halls dissolving like mist. You breathe slower, longer, softer, until each inhale feels like it stretches into the horizon. You picture the fortress crumbling into dust, not with fear, but with calm. The stones settle, the echoes quiet, the mountains themselves sighing into stillness. The torches go out one by one until the night is just darkness and stars, steady and distant. The weight of daggers and disguises slips away, the itchy robe, the heavy bread, even the endless dice games with goat bones, all of it becomes distant memory, soft and harmless now. What remains is a hush, a gentle reminder that even the sharpest fears wear down with time, leaving only peace. You imagine yourself lying in tall grass, the river murmuring nearby, the air cool but not cold. Crickets sing faintly, their rhythm lulling, and the world feels safe for once. No walls to climb, no letters to read, no masters to obey, just the endless night sky above, wide and forgiving. Your body grows heavy, comfortably sinking, while your mind drifts lighter and lighter. Thoughts blur, edges soften, and history itself feels like a story you've already set down, a book closed gently on the last page. And so you let go of the walls, of the daggers, of the whispers, and let the quiet carry you. The story has ended, the journey complete, and what's left is only calm. Sleep now, as the shadows fade, and dream gently.